Death of Ilych, translated by Louis and Elmer Moday. First published in 1886. This novel was written shortly after Tolstoy's religious conversion in the late 1870s. It tells the story Ivan Ilyich Kolovin, who is a highly regarded official of the court of justice, as well as an intelligent, lively, and agreeable man. However, as the story progresses, Ivan becomes more and more introspective and emotional while suffering an agonizing illness. 1. During an interval in the Mowensky trial, in the large building, the law courts, the members of the public prosecutor met in Ivan Igorovich Shebek's private room, where the conversation turned on the celebrated Krosovsky case. Fyodor Vasilevich warmly maintained that it was not subject to their jurisdiction. Ivan Igorovich maintained the contrary, while Peter Ivanovich, not having entered into the discussion at the start, took no part in it, but looked through the Gazette, which had just been handed in. "Gentlemen," he said, "Ivan Ilyich had died." "You don't say so?" "Here, read it yourself," replied Peter Ivanovich, handing Fyodor Vasilevich the paper still damp from the press. Surrounded by a black border were the words Praskovia Fodorina Golovina. With a profound sorrow, informs the relatives and the friends of the demise of her beloved husband, Ivan Ilyich Golovin, member of the Court of Justice, which occurred on February the 4th of this year, 1882. The funeral will take place on Friday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Ivan Ilyich had been a colleague of the gentleman present and was liked by them all. He had been ill for some weeks, with their illness said to be incurable. He supposed that it had been kept open for him, but there had been conjunctures that in the case of his death, Alexeyev might receive his appointment, and that either Vinnikov or Shitobel should succeed Alexeyev. So on receiving the news of Ivan Ilych's death, the first thought of each of the gentlemen in that private room was of the changes and promotions it might occasion among themselves or their acquaintances. "I shall be sure to get Shitobel's place or Vinnikov's," thought Fyodor Vasilevich. "I was promised that long ago, and the promotion means actual 800 rubles a year for me, besides its allowance. Then I must apply for my brother-in-law's transfer from Kaluga," thought Peter Ivanovich. "My wife will be very glad, and then she won't be able to say I never do anything for her relations." "I thought he would never leave his bed again," said Peter Ivanovich aloud. "It's very sad. But what really was the matter with him?" The doctors could not say, unless they could, but each of them said something different. When last I saw him, I thought he was getting better, and I haven't been to see him since the holidays. I was meant to go. Heading any property? I think the wife had a little, but something quite trifling. I wish you had to go to see her, but they live so terribly far away. Far away from you, you mean? Everything's so far away from your place. You see, he never can forgive my living on the other side of the river, said Peter, even now just smiling the shipback. Then, still talking of the distances between different parts of the city, they returned to the court. Besides considerations as to the possible transfers of the promotions likely to result from Ivan Ilych's death, the mere fact of the death of a near acquaintance arose, as usual, in all who heard of it, the complacent feeling that it is he who is dead and not I. Each one thought or felt, well, he's dead, but I am alive. But the more intimate of Ivan Ilych's acquaintances, his so-called friends, could not help thinking also that they would not have to fulfill the very tiresome demands for propriety by attending the funeral service and paying a visit of condolence to the widow. Further, Welesowicz and Peter Ivanovich had been his nearest acquaintances. Peter Ivanovich had studied law with Ivan Ilyich and had considered himself to be under obligations to him. Having told his wife at dinner time of Ilany's death and of his conjecture that it might be possible to get her brother transferred to the circuit, Peter Ivanovich sacrifices a usual nap, put on his evening clothes, and drove to Ivan Ilych's house. At the entrance stood a carriage and two cabs. Leaning against the wall, in the hall downstairs near the clock stand, was a coffin lid covered with a cloth of gold, ornamented with gold cord and tassels, and had been polished up with metal powder. Two ladies in black were taking off the fur cloaks. Peter Ivanovich recognized one of them as Ivan Ilych's sister, but the other was a stranger to him. His colleague, Schwarz, was just coming downstairs, but on seeing Peter Ivanovich enter, he stopped and winked at him as if to say, Ivan Ilyich made a mess of things, not like you and me. Schwarz's face with his Piccadilly whiskers and his slim figure even in dress, and as usual an air of elegant solemnity which contrasts with the playfulness of the character, and is a special piquance here, as it is saying to Peter Ivanovich. Peter Ivanovich allowed the lady to precede him and slowly followed them upstairs. Schwartz did not come down, but remained where he was, and Peter Ivanovich understood that he wanted to arrange whether he should play bridge that evening. The ladies went upstairs to the widow's room. The Schwartz with seriously compressed lips, but a playful look in his eyes, indicated by a twist of his eyebrows, the room to the right, where the body lay. Peter Ivanovich, like everyone else on such occasions, ended up feeling uncertain what he would have to do. All he knew was that at such times it is always safe to cross oneself, but was not quite sure whether one should make obeisances while doing so. He therefore adopted the middle course. On entering the room, he began crossing himself and made a slight movement resembling a ball, At the same time, as far as the motions his head and arm allowed, he surveyed the room. Two young men, apparently nephews, one of whom was a high school pupil, were living in the room, crossing themselves, and they did so. An old woman was standing motionless, and a lady with strangely arched eyebrows was saying something to her in a whisper. A vigorous, resolute church reader in a frock coat was reading something in a loud voice with an expression that precluded any contradiction. The butler's assistant, Gerasim, stepping lightly in front of Peter Ivanovich, was strewing something on the floor. Notice this, Peter Ivanovich was immediately aware of a faint odor of a decomposing body. The last time he had called on Ivan Ilych, Peter Ivanovich had seen Gerasim in the study. Ivan Ilych had been particularly fond of him, and he was performing the duty for a sick nurse. Peter Ivanovich continued to make the sign of the cross slightly, inclining his head in an intermediate direction between the coffin, the reader, and the icons on the table in the corner of the room. Afterwards, when it seemed to him that this movement is harm in crossing himself had gone on too long, he stopped and began to look at the corpse. The dead man lay, as dead men always lie, in a specially heavy way. His rigid limbs sunk in the soft cushions of the coffin, with the head far bowed on the pillow. His yellow waxen brow with obeyed patches over his sunken temple was thrust up in the way peculiar to the dead. The protruding nose seemed to press on the upper lip. He was much changed and grown even thinner since Peter Ivanovich had last seen him. But as is always the case with the dead, his face was handsomer and, above all, more dignified than when he was alive. The expression on the face said that what was necessary had been accomplished, and accomplished rightly. Besides this, there was in that expression a reproach and a warning to the living. This warning seemed to Peter Ivanovich out of place, unless not applicable to him. He felt a certain discomfort, and so he hurried across himself once more, and turned and went out the door too hurriedly and too regardless of propriety, as he himself was aware. Was waiting for him in the adjoining room, with the legs spread wide apart and both hands toiling with his top hand behind his back. The mere sight of that playful, well-groomed, aging figure refreshed Peter Ivanovich. He felt that she was above all these happenings, and would not surrender to any depressing influences. It's a weird look that this incident of a church service for Ivan Ilyich could not be a sufficient reason for infringing the order of the session. In other words, that it would certainly not prevent his unwrapping a new pack of cards and shuffling them that evening, while a footman placed fresh candles on the table. In fact, that there was no reason for supposing that this incident would hinder their spending the evening agreeably. Indeed, he said this in a whisper, and Peter Ivanovich passed him, proposing that they should meet for the game and Fyodor Vasilievich's. But apparently Peter Ivanovich was not destined to play bridge that evening. Praskonovia, Fedorovna, a sure fine woman who, despite all efforts to the contrary, had continued to broaden steadily from her shoulders downwards, and who had the same extraordinarily arched eyebrows as the lady who had been standing by the coffin, dressed all in black. Her hair covered with lace, came out to her own room with some other ladies, conducted themselves to the room where the dead body lay, and said, "The service will begin immediately. Please go in." She was making an indefinite bow, stood still, evidently neither accepting nor declining this invitation. Praskovya Fedorovna recognized Peter Ivanovich, sighed, went close up to him, took his hand, and said, "I know you were a true friend to Ivan Ilych." I looked at him, awaiting some suitable response. And Peter Ivanovich knew that, just as it has been the right thing to cross himself in that room. So what I had to do here was to press her hand aside and say, "Believe me." So he did all this. And as he did it, he felt that the desired result has been achieved, that both he and she were touched. "Come with me. I want to speak to you before it begins," said the widow. "Give me your arm." Peter Ivanovich gave her his arm, and they went to the inner rooms, pressing stewards, who went to Peter Ivanovich compassionately. "Thus, for our bridge. Don't object if we find another player. Promise you can cut in. We do escape," said his playful look. Peter Ivanovich sighed still more deeply and despondently, and Praskovya Fedorovna pressed his arm gratefully. When they reached the drawing room, upholstered in pink cretonne and lighted by a dim lamp, they sat down at the table, she on a sofa and Peter Ivanovich on a low parfait, the springs of which yielded spasmodically under his weight. Praskovya Fedorovna had been on the point of warning him to take another seat, but felt that such a warning was out of keeping with her present condition, and so changed her mind. And he sat down on the parfait. Peter Ivanovich recalled how Ivan Ilyich had arranged his room and had consulted him regarding this pink cretonne with green leaves. The whole room was full of furniture and knickknacks, and on her way to the sofa, the lace of the widow's blanket shawl caught on the edge of the table. Peter Ivanovich rose to detach it, and the springs of the parfait, relieved his weight, rose also and gave him a push. The widow began detaching her shawl herself, and Peter Ivanovich again sat down, suppressing the rebellious springs of the parfait under him. But the widow had not quite freed herself, and Peter Ivanovich got up again, and again the parfait rebelled and even creaked. When this was all over, she took out the clean cambric handkerchief and began to weep. The episode was a show and struggle with the parfait and to cool Peter Ivanovich's emotions, and he sat there with a sullen look on his face. This awkward situation was interrupted by Sokolov, Ivan Ilyich's butler, who came to report that the plots in the cemetery and that Prankovya Fedorovna had chosen would cost 200 rubles. She stopped weeping, looked at Peter Ivanovich with the air of a victim, remarked in French that it was very hard for her. Peter Ivanovich made a silent gesture, signifying his full conviction that it must indeed be so. "Please smoke," she said in a magnanimous, in a crushed voice, and turned to discuss with Skolov the price of the plot for the grave. Peter Ivanovich, while lighting his cigarette, heard her inquiring very circumstantially into the prices of different plots in the cemetery and finally decided which she would take. When that was done, she gave instructions about engaging the choir. Skolov then left the room. "I look after everything myself," she told Peter in Norwich, shifting the arms that lay on the table, and noticing that the table was endangered by his secret ash, immediately pressed him an ashtray, saying as he did so, "I consider it affectation to see that my grief prevents my attending to practical affairs. On the contrary, if anyone can, I would say console me, but distract me. It is saying to everything concerning him." He again took out her handkerchief as if prepared to cry, and suddenly, as if mastering her feeling, she shook herself and began to speak calmly. "But there is something I want to talk to you about," Peter Ivanovich bawled, keeping control of the springs of Parfait, which immediately began quivering under him. "He suffered terribly the last 3 days." "Did he?" said Peter Ivanovich. "Oh, terrible! He screamed unceasingly, not for minutes, but for hours. For the last 3 days he screamed incessantly. It was unendurable. I can't understand how I bore it. You could hear him 3 rooms off. Oh, what I have suffered!" "Is it possible that he was conscious for that time?" asked Peter Ivanovich. "Yes," she whispered. "The last moment. He took leave of us a quarter of an hour before he died and asked us to take one shell away. The thought of the suffering of this man he had known so intimately, first as a merry little boy, then as a schoolmate, and later as a grew-up colleague, suddenly struck Peter Ivanovich with horror, despite an unpleasant consciousness of his own at this woman's dissimulation. He again saw that brow and that nose pressing down on the lip, and felt afraid for himself. 3 days of frightful suffering, and the death. Why, that might suddenly and any time happen to me, he thought, and for a moment felt terrified. But did not himself know how. The customary reflection at once occurred to him that happened to Ilych and not to him, and that it could not happen to him, and that to think that it could would be yielding to depression, which ought not to do so, as Shiva's expression plainly showed. After which reflection, Peter Ivanovich felt reassured. I began to ask with interest about the detail of Ilich's death, and so death was accident natural to Ilych, but certainly not to himself. After many details of the really dreadful physical suffering Ilych had endured, which details he learned only from the effect of those suffering that had produced on Praskovina and Fedorovna's nerves, the widow apparently found necessary to get to business. "Oh, Peter Ivanovich, how hard it is! How terribly, terribly hard!" And she again began to weep. Peter Ivanovich sighed and waited for her to finish blowing her nose. When she had done so, he said, "Believe me," and she again began talking and brought out what was evidently her chief concern with him, namely, to question him as to how she could obtain a grant of money from the government on the occasion of her husband's death. She made it appear that she was asking Peter Ivanovitch's advice about her pension, but he soon saw that he already knew about that to the merest detail, more even than he did himself. She knew how much could be got out of the government in consequence of her husband's death, but wanted to find out whether he could not possibly extract something more. Peter Ivanovich tried to think of some means of doing so, but after reflecting for a while, and out of propriety, condemning the government for its niggardliness, he said he thought that nothing more could be got. Then she sighed and evidently began to devise means to getting rid of her visitor. Noticing this, he put out his cigarette, rose, pressed her hand, and went out into the anteroom. Anteroom, in the dining room where the clock stood that Ilych had liked it so much, and has bought an antique shop. Peter Ilovitch met the priest and a few acquaintances who had come to attend the service, and he recognized Ilovich's daughter, a handsome young woman. She was in black, and her slim figure appeared slimmer than ever. She had a gloomy, determined, angry expression, and bowed to Peter Ilovitch, and though he was in some way to blame. Behind her, with the same authentic look, stood a wealthy young man, an examining magistrate whom Peter Ilovitch also knew, and who was her fiancé, as he had heard. He bowed mournfully to them, and was about to pass into the death chamber, when from under the stairs appeared the figure of Ilovich's schoolboy son, who was extremely like his father. It seemed a little Ilych, such as Peter Ilovitch remembered when they studied law together. His tear-stained eye, and in them the look that is seen in the eyes of boys of 13 or 14, were not pure-minded. When he saw Peter Ilovitch, he scrawled morosely and shamefacedly. Peter Ilovitch nodded to him and entered the death chamber. The service began. Candles, groans, incense, tears, and sobs. Peter Ilovitch stood looking gloomily down at his feet. Now look once, and the dead man did not yield to any depressing influence, and was one of the first to leave the room. There was no one in that anteroom, but Garrison darted out of the dead man's room, rummaged with his strong hands among the floor clothes to find Peter Ivanovitch's, and helped him on with it. "Well, friend Garrison," said Peter Ivanovitch, so as to see something, "it's a sad affair, isn't it? It's God's will. We shall all come to it some day," said Garrison, displaying his teeth, the even white teeth of a healthy peasant. And like a man in the thick of urgent work, he briskly opened the front door, called the coachman, helped Peter Ilovitch into the sledge, and sprung back to the porch as if in readiness for what he had to do next. Peter Ilovitch found the fresh air particularly pleasant after the smell of incense and dead body and carbolic acid. "Where to, sir?" asked the coachman. "It is not too late even now. I will call round on Peter Vasilevich." He accordingly drove there and found them just to finish the first rover, so that it was quite convenient for him to cut in